Hi everybody, today I'm working on a 2007 Toyota Sequoia. I'm changing the front brakes. This car is basically the same as a Toyota Tundra pickup. I'm going to be installing a set of Callahan brake parts. I picked these up on Amazon for much cheaper than the local auto parts store for what I think is better quality. These are sold as a single kit with ceramic brake pads and with vented disc rotors. I'll put a link in the video description where you can get these parts. If you're ordering for a Sequoia or a Tundra, watch out for the size pads you get. Some of the, I believe it's 2002 and 2003 cars, have different calipers that require different sized pads. This is a big truck, so probably the biggest challenge I'm going to have is jacking it up and getting these front wheels off. Since it's so high off the ground, I'll stick a block of wood under here, and then I'm going to jack it up on the frame here. And be sure to always use jack stands. Looks like these lug nuts are 21 mil, just like most Toyotas that I've worked on. To make it easy to work on, I've jacked up the car basically exactly the same height I need to pull the wheel off. That way there's no heavy lifting. This is nice if you're just changing the pad. This truck has race-style cotter pins holding in the pads to the caliper. You just pull these out, and then the pads come out radial style, and you can just replace them really easily. On this car, we're going to be replacing the rotors as well, though, so that means we have to pull the calipers away from the hub. And we accomplish that by removing these two bolts here, and then pulling the caliper out of the way. We're also going to need to remove this bolt right here. Looks like a 12 millimeter. Because the hose from the frame of the car to the caliper is non-flexible. Usually we can just pull this away and then hook this up out of the way somewhere. Other than those two differences, this should be pretty much the same as any front wheel brake job. These are not captive rotors like a lot of trucks, where the rotor itself is actually behind the nut that holds the axle on. So these should be pretty easy to take off. So the first thing I like to do is grab a screwdriver and then gently pry to force the calipers back into their housings. And gentle pressure, and that just makes it easier to put everything back together later on. A lot of cars are single piston. This is a 4-piston setup, so I basically need to pry in both directions at the same time to force them back. Otherwise, when I press in on one side, the other side pops back out. Next, I'll pull these little small cotter pins. Just kind of pull up and out. Be careful not to lose these. Then we can pull the pins out. We'll pull out the little clip here which forces the brake pads away from the rotor. And we can pull the old pads out. So if you're just replacing the pads, that's all there is to it. But like I mentioned, we're also replacing the rotor, so I have to pull this caliper off as well. So first I'll remove this little bracket here for the solid brake line. And this is a 12 millimeter bolt that's on there pretty tight. There's a clip here for the wheel speed sensor, so I'm just going to kind of squeeze this and push backwards and it'll pop out. This is the clip right here. Alright, next I'll remove the caliper bolts. These are both 17 millimeter, one here and another one down here. These are going to be stiff as well, so I'm going to use a breaker bar. I'll back the bolt all the way and leave it hanging by the last thread, so the caliper doesn't fall on me when I take the top bolt out. And if I lift up just a little bit, I can take the weight off of the threads and back the bolt out the rest of the way by hand. Now when you take the caliper off, you don't want to suspend it from the brake line, so I just put a bungee cord through and hook it to some place on the body. Kind of like that. Okay, now we can turn our attention back to the rotor. On some cars the rotors are held in by small little bolts or screws. On this one there's nothing. It looks like we just need to hit it with a hammer real hard until it pops off, It seems to be just a tight fit to the hub. So grab a big 3-pound hammer like this one and just whack it from behind. And rotate as you do that. And it comes right off. New rotors come covered with some anti-rust coating. So you just want to spray them with brake cleaner and get all that stuff off of there. You don't need to go to town. It comes off pretty easily. Then we'll just put the new rotor in place. The new one slides right in place, but there's no rust adhesion, so I'm going to stick a lug bolt on the bottom here to keep it from flopping around while we're working on it. So this is a pretty easy car to do the brakes on, actually. Pretty simple. So we'll just take the bungee cord off, put it back in place, thread the bolts in by hand, the 17 millimeters. You want to tighten these to about, I'd say about 80 foot-pounds. I don't have a Toyota guide, so I can't tell you the exact number, but I'm going by feel here. And don't forget to put the line bracket back in place. This one, I tightened it to probably, about 20 foot-pounds. And remember to clip this clip back in for the wheel speed sensor. Okay, so now that we've got the caliper back on, next we're going to want to put some synthetic caliper grease on any of the spots where parts contact with each other than the rotor and the pad surface, of course. Once you've lubricated everything up, you just kind of wiggle it in there. It should go in pretty easily. You might need to grab your big screwdriver and push the pistons back in a little bit. And if you do that, be real careful not to damage the boots or anything like that. This one's going right in though, and usually it does actually. Then we'll put the pins back in. The bottom one just goes right in like this. Before putting the top pin in, we need to put this retaining spring in. So these two legs stick into the lower hole. Then we rotate it forward, squeeze until it sits on the inside of the calipers. That forces them out so that they're not riding on the rotor when you're not using the brakes. We'll put the last pin in. Make sure that it captures the spring here. Go through the hole completely. And then last, we'll put these cotter pins back in. Make sure it's in all the way, because if these fall out and the pin comes out, you ain't got no brakes. So just kind of pull on them a little bit and make sure that they're not going anywhere. Okay, that's good. So that's how to change the front brakes on a 2002 to 2007 Sequoia and similar year Toyota Tundra pickup. All I got to do is put the wheel back on. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.